Hello and welcome to another edition of Brand Champions Mixtape. This month we're talking something slightly different because it's Menopause Awareness Month. So I've got two very interesting guests here with me. I've got Claire Dale and Matt Falla, who are going to join me to discuss some of the points around Menopause Awareness Month. I'm going to start off, both of you, by just reading out some of the stats that are most harrowing when we start to delve into women's health, but specifically menopause. More than 90% of postmenopausal women were never taught about the menopause at school. Over 60% started looking for information about it once their symptoms had started. 1 in 10 people believe that women experiencing symptoms related to the menopause should not be entitled to any sick leave, which is quite worrying. And 63% are actually saying it's having a negative effect on their working life. We actually ran some of our own research, and the numbers that jumped out to me when we did that was 83% of respondents wanted those topics like menopause, miscarriage to be openly discussed, but actually only 5% of women felt comfortable discussing menopause with HR, for example. Claire, I wanted to come to you first because when we look at those figures, we realise how much of a taboo topic menopause still is. We're definitely making advances, but within the workplace, this is huge, right? So how do you think this can be improved?
Well, I think first of all, need to be aware that there's the kind of attitudinal aspect of our attitude to menopause, and there's also the understanding of the physiology of what's going on. And I think neither are very well understood, which is where we are now, I believe. We get into problems because it's all a little bit hazy, a little bit masked, and we don't really know how to speak about it. A couple of things to pull out on why it's such a taboo topic is because menopause has classified symptoms that go with it, like it's an illness. So that's one really key thing that we need to change, and we're in the process of changing. And the other key thing is that because HR functions are as they are, and because of that uncomfortableness of thinking of this as an illness, it just hasn't been spoken about openly enough. And there aren't enough structures in place for it to be aired. Now, things are slowly changing, but I think it is a mixture of women feeling completely confident to say, where I am in my life right now, I am menopausal, so that meeting at that time simply will not work for me. And what's more, we need to have the temperature of the room able to be modified if I'm going to function at best. There's something about the confidence of the women and the listening ear of the organisation. And it needs not to be a taboo like most things about women's bodies. You know, the menstrual cycle, don't mention it, or the menopause, don't mention it.
Yeah.
Because it's, the body has been ignored, othered in philosophical terms. It's been put outside. And in fact, this is why I work with physical intelligence, we're in a phase where the body is now being properly understood for its incredible, miraculous technology. So, yeah, I think there's all to play for here. We do need more changes, and it is changing slowly.
Yeah, agree. Matt, tell us about your experience working alongside people that have gone through or going through the menopause, because I think it's easy to think this is just something for women, but how can men play a really active and supporting role within this? Because it's a difficult thing. If it's such a taboo subject, people don't want to talk about it. It's harder for men as well to have that conversation.
I think it is, but I thinking back over my career, I can only think of one woman that I've ever worked with who's been open to me around the challenges that she had with the menopause. She was in a senior executive position in the business I worked in, and talked very openly about having to be in London for meetings and go back to her hotel to get changed because of the temperature regulation that was going on, and that for me just made me think how difficult that is. But also the fact is that it's not that I haven't worked with women going through the menopause, I just have not known that they were, because individuals I think are so skilled at trying to keep this inside. And I think we have come a huge way now in equality throughout the workforce, although still with a long way to go. Quite often the menopause I believe, is a double kick, because women maybe have just gone back to work after a family, and you're ready to get back into the working environment, and to a certain degree come up against the stigma that exists within the working world about men and women. And then suddenly, wham, along comes the menopause, and you've got brain fog and, thermodynamic challenges around your temperature and everything else that goes with it. So it's natural that, to a degree, society has created an environment where it has to be pushed down, because it's seen as a weakness. It's seen as something else that almost puts you secondary to people who are not suffering. And I think we now know so much more about what happens through the menopause, and the fact that it's going to affect every single woman to a lesser or greater degree, but still it's not brought to the surface. And I think you have to look at why that is, and ultimately that, as much as it's talked about, there's no allowance to bring that to the surface.
Mm-hmm.
And what does that mean, and how's it going to react? Because I actually think if it was, a vast majority of people are going to go, okay, well, what can we do? Because
Mm-hmm.
naturally, we are empathetic as humans. We're not going to say no to making the right level of adjustments to make sure everyone is as comfortable as they can be in the workplace, and as authentic as they can be in the workplace.
Yeah, I agree. And Claire, I was going to come to you next and talk to you about, your experience of where are people making adjustments within the workplace to accommodate this? Have you seen examples of people doing this well? Have we got workplace policies need to be changed? Because from my point of view, my understanding, and certainly when I've spoken to people, it's about judging each person in individual. So nobody wants a blanket approach. It's got to be very tailored, hasn't it? Because somebody like Matt just said might be coping and not actually want to talk about it, versus someone who's really struggling and wants to have that open dialogue. So that makes it hard. What do you think? Where have you seen examples of good?
Well, I think the two things are education and then that bespoke tailoring.
Yeah.
So where I see companies that are doing well, I'm thinking of a few examples. There are educational opportunities for all genders in the organization to understand what is exactly going on. And wherever we get involved, we will tell the physical intelligence story, which is the chemical story, so that we understand, as Matt just put it beautifully, this is seen as a weakness, but actually it's a factual change in a woman's life that doesn't end in disaster. It actually ends up, and I am testament to this, in a state of freedom, in a state of emotional and mental balance, wisdom, empowerment, hormonal fluctuations that can be quite like a tsunami during our menstrual years. They even out. And not only that, we can balance and boost them a little bit more. So we end up in a place of very great vitality. So let's be very, very clear about this. This is good for organizations, because also, as Matt said, women who are going through the menopause will tend to be in their absolute prime years of leadership, because they've made it. And here this thing comes, and we just need to understand it better. So can I take a few moments just to so if people are listening now and don't really know what's going on, let's explain very simply, and then look at what women can do, and also what organizations can do to support the women to do what they're doing. And there come the policy. So I think the policy needs to come out of the dialogue and should be slightly different for every organization. So what's really happening is that obviously there's a decrease in key hormones, testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone. Where a woman feels the bigger effects of those changes is where the levels change suddenly. So what a woman wants, and what an organization wants to support, is the gradual decline rather than the seismic drop of those chemicals. And the things that support that smooth passage, it can be by the use of HRT. I actually prefer to recommend bioidentical. Anything that we take, supplements or bioidentical hormones, seem to be very, very successful. But actually, the two key factors in the research that I've done are, number one, stress levels. Because if a woman is running high cortisol, guess what? The three hormones that I've mentioned, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, are all made from a basis of another chemical, DHEA, and they're all made from cholesterol. So if our cholesterol is being used, the available cholesterol, to create cortisol, there isn't enough to create enough testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone to take us on this smooth journey, which is a natural journey. So one thing is to really be clear about, and all leaders, wherever we go and work, the fact that leaders feel that they take charge of their calendar, of their focus, and of the levels of good stress and bad stress, let's just say, because stress is not a bad thing. But so to that taking charge. The other thing that research tells us makes a huge difference is starting early with making sure you're fit, aerobically fit, strong and physical with your body. And so then if you hit the menopause, and because you've given your all to an organization plus your family and not taking care of yourself, you're likely to hit the menopause a little bit harder. So that's why businesses that I work with that really support every employee to go do their fitness, and you've got leaders that are modeling that. This supports women to have an easier ride through their menopause. So that's what's happening. Then a woman has got a range of possibilities to be able to help themselves through it. And the most important thing, I think, is education and awareness. And so I'd like that information that I've just given in a few minutes here, I'd like that to be absolutely known everywhere about this is the simple thing of what's happening in a woman's body.
Absolutely. And the key takeaway from what you just said for me personally was the positivity, because I think it's very easy to get caught up in the doom and gloom of the menopause and women's health, and we think it's all bad and negative. And actually the message you gave there really clearly was, vitality is the end of this. It's a natural journey. There is good stuff to come. It doesn't have to be all doom and gloom. So that takes us back to your point around education. I had the exact conversation with my daughter last night when she said to me, what exactly is the menopause? So Matt, you and I have talked about this so much because in schools we've seen a real shift to open conversations about periods, and they're really kind of not got those hang-ups that I had as a child about having those conversations. So how do we get this younger generation to be better educated about menopause before, like you say, and like the research said, we're in it, we're going through it, people are having to then get to grips with it? How do we get them ahead of the game so that men and women can support themselves going through the menopause journey, do you think?
I think Claire and yourself said it's education. It's discussing this as part of a journey. It's not the end of something, it's the start of a next chapter. I think it's accepting, as with so many things that we're discussing, mental health is now part of the conversation. The things that we go through in life, grief, so much before has just been ignored, and you plow on and you push it down into somewhere you think has disappeared, and it pops up somewhere else. So I think, for my children, I've got a daughter who's 6 and a son who's 10. All around him are female family members, friends, teachers who will be going through this. I think we live in a world now, we try and closet our children as much as possible from perceived fears, and actually what that leaves them in is a position of ignorance. And we underestimate just how much they can pick up and understand, and how much empathy that creates if they have knowledge as to why things are happening and why things are going on. And I think we underestimate just how much the younger generation has to input into this, and how much they can normalize that conversation. I think going back to the point we mentioned before about businesses, I think just almost overarching, businesses need to stop doing as much that is this really sort of inadequate box ticking exercises across everything that affects us as humans. You know, you've got the approach of, well, we're a menopause friendly workplace. Why? Because we've got a certificate. Brilliant. And you know, Brenda's going through the menopause, so we've stuck her by the window, we've opened it, we've given her a fan. So there we go, that's fine.
Yeah.
You know, as individuals, we should be able to dictate how we're treated. And whether that's that individual's right to know that they're in a place where if they're suffering mentally, if they're going through something physically, then they have the ability to be themselves in work and to be trusted that they're actually a pretty fantastic worker who wants to do well and just needs an environment that is supportive of that. So I think we need to move away a lot from these very obvious badges and stickers and everything else and just create something that is less obvious to see but is far more powerful to feel, which is an empathetic workplace that accepts you as an individual and not just as an age demographic or a condition. And I think from that, we'll also educate the generations that are coming through that this is just, it is amazing to me that something so normal that will affect 50% of the population is still having to be brought to the surface. And that, for me, having woken up in 2024 and realized my mother was going through this, probably my grandmother was going through this, my wife is going through this, or at some stage, and I still don't feel quite able to have that conversation with my wife, it has to change, because without that there is just an isolation, an ignorance, and it's my thing to deal with. I'm going to deal with it. And if that is with a menopause, then it's also with mental health, it's also with trauma, it's also with grief. And if you can't be yourself, then that's a pretty sad place to be in.
Agree. So I think there's been a few really main takeouts for me from this conversation. One is massively, it's all about education. Definitely about having open conversations and, as we said, treating everyone individually, because we don't want that blanket approach. Positivity. I think, I don't want this to feel like doom and gloom, and I think that message getting relayed is really important. Probably unfair because I didn't tell you I was going to say this, but what is the one thing for both of you that, if you had to sum up, what do we need to do next? What's the next step from us having conversations like this? What do you think we need to do? Claire, can I pick on you first?
For me, it is about understanding the science and then celebrating the entire different phases of a female's life, which is distinct from someone who's presenting as male gender, who is biologically male gendered. And the different phases are glorious in their own right? They have their difficulties, as with anything. But I want women to, if you are menstruating, you're in that phase of your life, be aware that on high estrogen days, the middle of your cycle, you'll probably walk further, because you'll be in go seek mode, confidence mode. So really use the times in any cycle where you feel on top of the world. And I remember what that felt like in my cycle when I was menstruating. So I think that that's really important. There's some great resources. Maisie Hill has written a book called Period Power, which is great. If I had a daughter, I would be, giving her that for Christmas. And there's a wonderful new app called Flow, which is for women. And then the education about this new phase of life, the wisdom, the increased leadership capacity as your chemistry balances out. And you said you shed a lot of the emotional and mental components of a previous period in your life. And it should be a period of working towards a liberation. And with any kind of rite of passage, I'm thinking about some of the rites of passage that historically men have had to go through in various tribes all over the world. There's strife and trouble and all kinds of difficult aspects to rites of passage. And there's a bit of a sense of that with the menopause. I think we should be proud of it and talk about it as much as we want to. And take charge.
Yeah, don't be a victim. You know, you've got to be leading it, haven't you?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Matt, what about for you?
I think Claire just touched on it then. You know, for almost time immemorial, we've had communities around individuals that have helped them move from one phase of life to the next, and some quite monumental phases. That period from 0 to 2, the period through puberty, the period into adulthood. And I think we've lost that now. We've become isolated very much within those groups. And we've also outsourced education to educators. And I think there needs to be much more of the story told around life that embraces all of it. Anyone who has been lucky enough to read Simon Boas's book, A Beginner's Guide to Dying, just you realize that it's everything is part of that death makes life so special, and that this is going to happen. Death is inevitable. The menopause is inevitable. Puberty and periods are inevitable. Things are happening, and to ignore it is to deny it, and it's to deny the opportunity to create, as Claire has so articulately said, to create a positive narrative around it. And I think that sort of thing, that education is not just about the facts, it's about the feelings, about what will happen, and that it is naturally part of life cycle. And also, I think, just to create an environment in the workplace where if someone says, I'm feeling like this, and this is what I'd like to happen, that they're listened to. They're not pushed into a box. They don't feel marginalized, and they can come to work free of that burden of having to put on a different mask between the hours of 9 to 5.
Absolutely. Okay, well, huge thanks to Claire Dale and Matt Falla for talking to me in this very important month that does just a little job of raising some of the awareness around menopause. They've both mentioned some books and some recommended, so we'll make sure we add those when we get this published as well. But yeah, huge thanks from me for joining me today.
Thanks, Fiona.